Again, we still have a rational expression because it is still a polynomial, a binomial divided by a binomial. Last thing I want to do is just start canceling. Factor away. GCF in the numerator, 6 times x minus 2, right? 6 times x is 6x. 6 times negative 2 is negative 12. Divided by GCF is 7. Unrelated to the top, x minus 2. 7 times x is 7x. 7 times negative 2 is negative 14. Here are my GCFs, but now because I have a common binomial, that's what's going to cancel. It won't always be the coefficients, and it won't always be the binomials. It just totally depends on the problem. 6 over 7 ends up being my reduced form, which is interesting because now I don't even have a variable. And that's totally fine too. That just means whatever number I plug in for x here is going to give me a fraction that will ultimately reduce to 6 over 7. Now, when I'm asked to state the restrictions, even though I look over here at my 7, I can't just say change the sign and say negative 7. Negative 7 is totally fine. Negative 7 would not be undefined. Negative 7 would not give me a 0 in the denominator. Even though it cancels, the only number that will, x can't be 2. Change that sign. If I were to plug in 2 minus 2 is 0. 0 times 7. Even if I had 7 times 2 is 14 minus 14, that's what gives me a 0 in the denominator. It's the binomial. It's only when we have an x, only when we have those polynomials that I factored, the number alone, the integer, will not have anything to do with the restriction. My next example, very similar. 5a plus 15 divided by 10. You'll notice that these ones are actually getting a little bit easier because there's less work, but that's because some of the easier problems are so much more reduced that sometimes it feels like I should be doing more work and maybe I'm making a mistake because I'm not doing that additional work. GCF in the numerator, 5 times a plus 3. Because if I distribute that, 5 times a is 5a. 5 times 3 is 15. Same numerator, divided by 10. But now notice when I have 5 over 10, that's what's going to reduce. Divide by 5, divided by 5, I get 1. I get 2. Leaving me 1 times the numerator. Again, I wouldn't put the 1 for the same reason I wouldn't put the parentheses. Reduce it. A plus 3 over 2. Well, if I have a plus 3 over 2, there's my reduced form. What are my restrictions? Again, a number alone. Not a restriction. Not a negative 2. Negative 2 wouldn't give me 0. Not a negative 3. I don't care about my numerator. My restrictions have never had anything to do with my numerator. It's only the denominator. And in fact, without a variable in the denominator, nothing will ever be restricted. And that doesn't mean no solution. That doesn't mean undefined. That doesn't mean anything special. To say no restrictions is a good thing. Restrictions are actually bad. Restrictions limit us. This says I can pick any number except 2. This says I can pick any number that I want. To say it's restricted is actually limiting myself. And to have no variables means I can pick anything that I want. From the very first day, we reduced rational expressions. We just didn't call them that. When we had our quotient of powers, well, hey, there it is. When I have my 8 over 24, I can reduce. Divide by 8 gives me 1 over 3. Quotient of powers, subtract my exponents. Remember what that fundamentally means is x squared is x times x. Canceling out my x's, or subtracting, gives me, I have 1 lone x in the top. I have 1 lone 3 in the bottom. Here's my reduced form for the rational expression if I look at it that way, but it's the same quotient of powers we did that very first day of class. But when I look at my restrictions now, judging by this last problem, I want to say no restrictions because there are no variables. But wait, anything that cancels is guaranteed to be a restriction. For the same reason back here, x can't be 0. No constant again. Think about if I plug in 0. 0 times 24 would give me a 0 in the denominator. But just like fundamentally before, if I set that 24x equal to 0, divide by 24, divide by 24, that would still give me 0 divided by 24 would still give me that same 0. Remember that even what cancels, we're in fact guaranteed that what cancels is going to give me a restriction.